you so much for having me today. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to let the audience know I am just overcoming a cold, so bear with me a little bit with my voice today, but that is definitely not going to slow me down for our presentation. There's really three things that I'd like to do today as we think about. The very first thing is, as a researcher, I always want to bring data to the conversation. So I want to help level set of all of the change that's happened specifically as it relates to remote work trends and how it may be impacting you personally as a worker and maybe as a leader within your organization. The second thing then is I want to talk about with data how people are feeling about it. What is the global workforce feeling as it relates to remote work and how are people holding up? We are well into the COVID-19 global pandemic. Many of us have sustained remote work for probably much longer than we may have anticipated. So how are people feeling? And then third and most importantly, which was already teed up, is how do we build trust in remote environments? We ran a study of over 5,400 global workers during the summer months in real time to understand what are the actual elements, what are the behaviors we have to get right in order to actually make remote work will actually work for us today. So, without further ado, let me get right into it. If we can go to the next slide, please. What we have here is a really big, profound shift. Before COVID hit, if you take a look at the data, not less than the majority actually felt that their employer even supported remote work, which may be very surprising. So you see almost overnight what happened is very few people were working remote full time, less than 10%. And then when COVID-19 hit throughout the world at different points in time, we found that nearly 60% of the global workforce transferred over into whether it was a home office or some sort of remote location. This is a profound shift. As you think about it in terms of culture, leadership, the way that we actually work was overnight shifted. And it was a big mindset shift for many organizations who historically maybe did not champion or support remote work and overnight had to. And so as we move on, what does this mean, in the data? And what does this actually look like? So a couple of things I want to point out here. Right off the bat, people don't necessarily, one of the myths that's out there is whether or not people enjoy working from home. To what extent do people actually want to work from home? What is the optimal amount? And we actually have the data to share with you today on what that actually looks like. So let's take a look. Prior to COVID, like I mentioned, 61% of the global workforce never even worked remote before. Today, during COVID, we see that number almost flip flop. 57% of the global workforce is still working from home remote. But what's the optimal number? This may or may not surprise you, but actually, when we went out and asked the 5,400 global workers, 4% said that was actually optimal to be working full time from home. Instead, people actually would prefer some sort of hybrid model, whether that's 25 to 50%. So I'd ask you today, as you think about remote work, how are you faring? What would be the optimal number? And again, as a data scientist and social scientist, we're always looking at exact numbers. We calculated based on this data set, what is the optimal number of hours that people would like to work? People told us it was going to be right around 33% was the average optimal time workers like to spend working from home. But let's talk about the shift. What actually are people feeling and how are people responding today to that shift? Well, as I mentioned, less than the majority actually want to work full time from home. I think many of us can think about whether it's the dogs barkings or balancing childcare. There's a lot of disruptions, and it comes from working from home. And as I'll share with you in a minute, a lot of people are feeling very lonely working from home and isolated as well. 28% of people, and this may be surprising, said, I'm not sure I really want to work from home again. And so we see this trend fluctuate depending on what's happening throughout the global environment. And this is obviously a very personal, individualized number depending on your home circumstance. Again, as I mentioned, 33% was the magic number of where people want to actually work from home. And not just that, this is a very important number too. A third of the global workforce is really change fatigued. They're stressed about the number of changes that are happening in the macro and micro environments. But here's the good news, and I think hopefully we're going to continue to see this number shift in the right direction. About 50% of people say they can do their job just as effectively remote as they can from home, or I apologize, in an office. And I think it's so great because we have the technology. I've been studying the future of work now for almost a decade. And I always said, we've got to transform our people practices. We've got to give people autonomy and flexibility. The technology is there, but we have to change the human element, the people practices to actually support that change and transformation. So let's continue on with all the trends that we continue to see within the data set. So here's something to keep an eye on. On our next slide is this. As you'll take a look, we've been doing a longitudinal study to see how the attitudes have changed since COVID first hit, at least here in the States, and this is a global set throughout all of the globe. What has been happening as people have had to work remote much longer than anticipated? Well, here's where I get concerned as a social scientist and as someone who studies people at work. What I'm seeing in the data is that we have a fatiguing remote workforce. So if you take the data in late March, whether or not people felt they had an appropriate work from home space, whether or not they enjoyed working from home, thought they could be productive from home. Big question here, how can we easily collaborate with our teammates when we work from home? And whether or not do I feel my employer supports me? Do I feel supported even though I'm not necessarily going into a physical location day in and day out? Well, if you take a look in late March and even in April, the numbers were fairly optimistic. But what we see happening is a downward trend. So that space that people felt that they had appropriate from work from home, 10% of the people no longer said as the global pandemic sustained itself, that space was still appropriate. Whether or not people enjoyed working from home, we see a significant downshift as well. Again, when it comes to being productive, and then this is a number, and this is what I really want to help hopefully give you tools with today, whether or not you can collaborate with your peers while working remotely. This is probably one of our biggest declines, and we see that pretty consistent even as of July, our latest data collection. That's only about 1 in 2 of global workers today actually feel that they can collaborate with their peers. And I think trust is a big element of what might be missing, and we'll be providing action steps that you can take to actually build that. And again, whether or not you feel supported by your employer, we saw a big dip happen in June. We see that number coming back up, but nowhere near to the same degree as it was in late March and April. So if we can move on to the next slide, what else is happening? I look at data, and as a social scientist, I think, what is happening underneath the surface of those trends? What is happening in the organizational environment that may be missing that's causing some of this downward shift in this fatiguing workforce? A couple of things that we tend to look at. Do you have the right resources to work remotely? This may or may not surprise you. This surprised me. Only 29% of the global workforce said they were given new tools as a result of this remote work phenomenon. And not just that, when it comes to additional support, only 36%, so about 1 in 3 workers said, yeah, I feel my company's actually provided some additional support to help me make this transition. And now again, I work with a lot of CHROs and an HR side, and this is something where people are playing catch up when it comes to the policies, work from home policies. What are the norms that we establish for working hours? How do we actually make this work for us? And so I think from an organizational perspective, we see many organizations and leaders were caught a little bit off guard when this happened. And so we have some catch up to do. But there's some things that you as an individual or you as a team lead can start to do to start reversing this trend. One is whether or not do you have a routine in the mornings? It was pretty surprising. If you did not have a routine back in March, only 50% of workers said they did. It's much less likely you have a routine today. But it's never too late to get started. So establishing a healthy routine. Again, what are going to be the meeting norms to make sure that we can start combating this change fatigue that we see happening in the workforce? Do you have the right environment? What is your workspace like at home? And how do we help our employees and our people in our workforce to ensure that they have the proper tools and resources in order to make this effective? And what you see here in this data is these things are very much connected back to how people feel. And again, a lot of it comes down to our environment. But here's the great thing. We have more control over our environment today than we ever had in times past. And it's really important that we take this newfound autonomy and really own the environment that we work in our work from home space. But in our next slide, here's the other things I want to make sure that we talk about. As I talked about remote work guidelines and devices and tools, and you might be asking, why are you focusing so much on the technology side of this? Well, that is because, as you're going to see shortly, when it comes to building trust, having the right tools, devices, and policies in place actually make a really big difference. Those are part of the things we need, the guardrails when it comes to team decision making and making this new phenomenon work. So, like I said before, less than 50% of organizations actually had policies that help guide them. HR policies, company wide policies, and many have had to move to team policy just to help close that gap. But again, the first question is what is your company's policy for remote work? either you as an individual or you as a leader of an organization or as a team? And how do you help continue to expand and have that more inclusive and flexible for the workforce? Second thing, 56% of people were offered devices for remote work. And this is surprising, especially for any of you who are out there in the security land. 34% of people are actually using their personal devices when it comes to remote work. And so, again, we're having people shift between the personal and professional, and we're seeing that even on the technology world. And as I mentioned before, less than 30% actually are being equipped with the new technology. It's funny, I was quite surprised to see some of my friends who had literally just taken their laptops or taken a desktop that they were working off from their office and just plop it right on to whether there's their kitchen table in office and didn't really reimagine the space in which they could work in. And so it's really important that you equip yourself today with the right tools that's going to make you effective. But I'd love to take a moment here, a pause, and do a quick poll right now and want to assess where everyone is today in terms of their workforce experience. And one of the questions we ask throughout all of our polling is this really simple question: how much do you trust your team today? So, whether hopefully many of you are likely in a remote situation, but even if you're not, when it comes to your colleagues, the teams that you have to work with in order to get work done, how much do you trust them? And we tend to ask this in a fairly simple manner, whether that is through a lot, I trust my team a lot, somewhat, or not at all. And so I'd love to see what the audience today is. I see we've got over 2,500 people with us. How are people faring with their teams today? How are people, do you trust the work to get done? And I'll give you a global benchmark as we're waiting for the results to come in. It's this: 60% of people today trust the teammates they have. Now, I was talking about it with some colleagues. I'm not sure what we would actually rate that score, whether 60% is necessarily positive, maybe a C minus on a scorecard. But the reality is, really only a little over one in two of us actually trust the people we work with. And during a time where social connection is so important, many of us are still physically distanced, practicing social distancing. Our ability to make this technology work and able to build teaming behaviors is absolutely important. And I see a lot of trust is coming through. It sounds like a lot of people here. I've got a couple comments coming in. 100% trust. Some people are saying trust is on the decline. And great question coming up here too. How do we define trust? So let's just get right into it and get into the model of what we found. So on our next slide, what we did as a social science team is really drilled into the components of what build trust. It's one thing a lot of times we see out there in headlines and within the literature how important it is to trust your organization. But we as a research team wanted to take it one step further. Not only whether or not I trust my organization is going to do the right thing, as everything we just talked about, provide me with the right resources, provide me with the guardrails to make remote work, but we wanted to go a double click down because at the end of the day, it's really hard to control policies and organizational brand. But what we can do as human beings is trust each other and start operating differently within our local units in order to actually create better workforce experiences. So, in our model we created, we tested two things. One, do I trust the organization to do the right thing? I got to make sure I feel safe, I feel protected, I feel healthy. But the second thing is, do I trust my teammates to still deliver high quality work in this remote environment? Do I trust that we're going to be able to make the technology work for us? And so we went ahead and designed a really robust study, and we tested we actually had over 100 questions in our survey when we went out into the market. And we ran a factor analysis to determine what were going to be those elements that would actually predict whether or not an employee answered, yes, I trust my teammates. Yes, I still trust them in a remote environment. And we found that this matters tremendously because in our data, when employees trust each other at a local team level, as we're all working remote, regardless of the platform you're on, we find innovation upticks, efficiency upticks, as well as workforce development and new skilling, upskilling opportunities. And so this is crucial to get right. So on our next slide, what I want to do is dive into these building blocks and give you with some examples of what you can do as individuals or as team leads to actually start taking these practices into your workplace today. Right off the bat, let's talk about how we communicate with each other through these platforms. Communications are so important. Today, what is utmost importance, probably more so than ever before, is it timely? things are changing at rapid speed. We've always said for the last, 10 years, we live in this complex VUCA world. But the reality is we actually do today. We are fighting many pandemics and we're fighting a lot of human issues in the workforce. So for us, a lot of the conversations in the United States have been about the systematic racism we're also trying to combat within our organizational systems. We have a lot of human issues at play here and opportunities to make this right. So how do we make sure we're communicating in a timely manner, that it's clear and we're transparent? We no longer necessarily always have the body language cues that we can pick up from one another. We're either sending chats, we're sending emails, we're having to rely much more on that digital platform. And so, how do we make sure we're as clear and transparent as possible? But one of the things we often miss as a result of everything that's going on is this: we have to make sure we're empathetic in our communications. People have a lot on their plate today. And really, I mean, I could tell you from my inbox, the amount of emails I have over the last several months has grown exponentially. And so making sure that we still lead with empathy in the way that we communicate with one another. We're human beings, we're not robots. And let's make sure that we bring the human element, even as we use technology as the platform for communication. The second thing, as I talked about before, tools, technology, and training. People, we have to get the modern technology side of this right. And this is why Miro is such a great platform. Getting the technology right, being able to actually bring out our collaborative behaviors, driving innovation, knowledge sharing. We have to find the right tools that allow us to do this. And so I encourage you, if you don't have the right tools, ask for the right tools to your leader, to your organization, and also don't use this opportunity to miss out on learning and upskilling. We have a brand new study coming out next month at Accenture Research, and it clearly shows the importance of digital skills. We've talked a lot about digital skills being important. Today, that's a reality. The third thing is collaborative cultures. I just came off a team call with my team that I lead at Accenture Research today, and I said, a lot of times we've designed our organizations to be competitive. We reward competitive behaviors, and a lot of you working at organizations, we tend to look for those type A competitive people. But what we need right now in order to build trust, and what actually builds trust, is those collaborative behaviors. At the end of the day, as human beings, we're wired for connection and purpose. And being able to connect with colleagues in a collaborative way where I trust that you are going to take this information and do something good with it. I feel a sense of belonging to this team. Even though we're not in person, I still know who you are, what you're about, and we've established the team norms that we're going to move forward together with a collective purpose, which leads me to my fourth one. What is the purpose that your team is operating by? There's a lot of talk about organizational macro purpose. Again, that is extremely important. But when it comes down to your teams and you as an individual, what is your why? What is it? Why are you doing what you're doing every day? Harvard just released an article coming out saying we're working about 8%, 10% more every week as a result of our new work environments. We're actually giving more of ourselves. So, what is our why? And making sure that as teammates, we're all connected into that collective purpose. When we're able to actually do that, we see behavior move and performance accelerate. And then the last thing is supportive leadership. And again, leadership, we can either define this by a function or a role, or we can define it as just people working together, having to come in and influence every point in time, depending on where projects are. What is the leadership formula that you have to get right today? And again, we've tested this against many, many different variables. And what we found were these two things that predicted whether or not I trust my leader and whether or not I trust people around me. Number one is compassion. The fact of the matter is we are still in a global environment. We are in an environment that's under shock. We have a shared human experience right now as we all combat the global pandemic. And so whether or not I feel as a person, do I care for your well-being? Do I care whether or not you're safe and healthy? That's the first thing we have got to get right in our interactions. The second thing, though, you can't just be compassionate. We're in business and we have to continue to move things forward in order to keep our societies and our economies moving forward. And so we also need a sense of confidence as a project lead or as a team lead, ensuring that you have that confidence to handle risk, to be able to handle the ambiguity that's being faced against us every day. That's the formula. So I have a little sticky note I have in my laptop that says supportive leadership, making sure I get right every day, compassion plus confidence. So these are the five building blocks. And on the next slide, I just want to share with you some of the data and how we derive to this and why they matter. As you see, we call these the building blocks of trust. These are astounding numbers as a researcher to see this in the data set. People who experience these things are those that have high trust. In essence, If you're not communicating timely, clear, and empathetic, you're not going to have people who trust you. If you don't have supportive leadership behaviors, a compelling purpose, when you look at these numbers, these almost clearly predict and explain whether or not people do trust you as a team and trust you as a team lead. And on the next slide, what I want to get into are the actual outcomes of this before we open it up to Q&A. Why does it actually matter? At the end of the day, we're all in business. We want to actually see outcomes. Many of us are outcome driven. So what are those outcomes? Take a look at these bars. The darker color you'll see is whether or not they're a leader, whether or not they're best organization. High trust organizations and teams have highly agile workforces. They're much less likely to have that change fatigue. And this is important for people when craving stability right now, wanting to work for the company for a long time. We see when you have trust, boy, does that have an uptick in whether or not people want to work for you for a while. Again, whether or not they're seen as a leader in people experiences, innovation, and operational efficiency. And I'll say a lot of times we kind of have, oh, you need innovation or efficiency. We actually find in high trust environments, it's an and. You can be innovative and drive efficiencies. So I want to close out. I know I've shared three things with you today. We've level set in the remote work trends. What a profound shift this has been. We've talked about how people are feeling about it, the fatigue. And then I've also shared with you the building blocks of actually how you create high trust teams in a remote environment. And so if I can leave you with three more things to take away, here's the thing. Let's not confuse remote work with autonomy and flexibility. People want choice. Let's not use technology to micromanage. That actually takes away trust. Let's use the technology. The true optimism, the future of work is that we would be much more in control of our work lives. Let's allow the technology to do that and allow our leadership and teaming behaviors to free people of that. The second thing is you don't have to be in a leadership position, just have to be a human being. Ensure that you're still applying supportive behaviors that build trust. Um, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Great. Sorry about that. Got a little bit of feedback. So I'm going to leave you with this. Compassion and confidence have never been more important. So again, in all of your interactions, remember we're having a global shared human experience. Lead with compassion, but also bring your A game and have confidence that we as a collective team will get through this. And the third thing is technology and tools matter. Ensure you have the right workforce skills, the digital skills, and the digital platforms to actually enact and enable all of these collaborative behaviors in the workplace. The tools you use absolutely matter. So with that, I'd like to thank you for having me today. And I think we've got about 4 to 5 minutes here and open up for some Q&A.
Oh, hello. I was just talking for about 5 minutes to myself. Kelly, thank you so much for a great presentation. We just completed our engagement survey within Miro. It will be super interesting to compare your data points and your findings with what we see internally. I actually already see some resemblance in data points. You drew the picture about how difficult it is to build trust in a world where people moved from office setting to fully remote. It seems like a lot of companies out with announcements that they're creating hybrid models where a few days it's in the office, few days remote, some teams in the office, sometimes the off, some people are remote. And it seems like building trust in that hybrid model is even more difficult versus while everybody's in the remote, because now you have broken down communication lines. Somebody is in the room, somebody is not in the room. Any insights or any advice or best practices that you can share for teams that choose this hybrid models?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. A couple of things that come to mind as I think about the hybrid models, which again, in a lot of our forecasting data we see looks like that's going to be a pretty strong future trend. First question is, how do we actually use our in-person office space? What is the purpose of those meetings now? We know we can do so much remotely, and so many platforms have enabled us to do a lot more with our autonomy and choice and our own schedules. And so, how do we make sure when we come together as teams in person, we're actually using that time for knowledge sharing, innovation, creativity? It's not a time to all get back on the laptops and do a round robin status update. Take that newfound time in person and actually use it to create and add value. And the second thing is, I would say, as we move to more of a hybrid model, let's err on the side of inclusion. Not everyone is necessarily going to be able to come in at all times, and everyone who has had that experience, who knows being the person on the phone, let's use technology. Let's normalize using video for those who are not able to actually be in person, and really be much more inclusive in the way that we think about meetings, whether remote, whether you're in person. Let's ensure that all feel included and are invited. And let's, again, really rely on video for those who are in person, so people can feel better part of the group.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question I wanted to ask is another layer of complexity. As one of the beautiful things about the shift to remote is that now we can build cross-cultural teams. Now the teams don't have to be from the same city, from the same country, from the same culture. So I think the emergence of global cross-cultural teams will be a trend. That's another layer of complexity. Any advice as to best practices, or how do you build trust in remote cross-cultural teams?
Yeah, another great question. And I have to say, I have one of the honors at Accenture Research of probably leading one of our most diverse teams across the globe. And so, two things I would say here we've got to get right. One is we have to create capacity for diversity. Diversity does add another layer of complication, but it adds a beautiful layer of creativity, innovation. We know highly diverse teams outperform those who don't, but we have to create the capacity for that. But what does that, what do I mean by that? And what does that look like? One is ensure that team meetings start by getting to know each other and the cultural norms. A lot of times, even communication styles could be misinterpreted with a lack of understanding of culture. And so, really building in the capacity right from the start to understand what are the norms, what are the cultural norms and behaviors, and really have transparent conversations. It goes back to that communications element of building trust. How do you make sure that you're still doing it in an empathetic way? Assume positive intent from people. And again, really build that capacity within your team to make room for diversity, because at the end of the day, highly diverse teams always outperform those who aren't.
Excellent. We have another question about diversity and inclusion, and it is about when everybody's in the room and you're running an interactive meeting, it's probably easier to bring people into the discussion. We have 30 seconds left. Just a quick insight. Is there any advice how to bring people into the discussion in the remote setting to avoid groupthink and silence?
Yes, there's a couple ways. One is to make sure that every voice is heard. A lot of times we've all been in those meetings where there's a tends to be a dominant voice. Have a forced round robin. Some people are not going to naturally speak up. Some people aren't going to necessarily want to go on video. Really get people comfortable with speaking up in meetings and make sure that you actually have the space in your agenda and you're intentional about it. Another way to do that is making sure when it comes to the actual administrative tasks during a team meeting that you're rotating those tasks. And at the end of the day, it's really, again, assuming positive intent from people. People want to be in the room. People want to be heard. Make sure you're giving people that space. Ask more questions. Do a lot more questions than necessarily telling. And I think it's a great question. My goal is all these technology platforms will make our teaming that much more diverse and hopefully inclusive as we move forward in the future of work.
Amazing. We packed so much content in 30 minutes. Kelly, appreciate your time. I think it was super useful for everybody. Thank you so much again for coming and hosting this wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much for having me.